Good afternoon and welcome to today's Election Security Public Forum. What Collin County voters can expect in 2022. I am Charlotte McKenzie, President of the League of Women Voters of Collin County. On behalf of LWV Collin County, thank you for joining us. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan grassroots organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. We fulfill our mission to empower voters and defend democracy through advocacy, education, and litigation at the local, state, and national levels. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Locally, we serve as a trusted organization that focuses on educating community members on important and timely issues. With the passage of Senate Bill 1 during the 87th session of the Texas legislature, sweeping legislation that further tightens state election laws and restricts local control of elections, we found it imperative to inform the public on how this bill impacts voters' access to the ballot box. Our guest speakers for today's event are Bruce Sherbet, Collin County Elections Administrator, and Christina Das, NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Prior to this forum, the Election Security Committee shared topics of interest with our speakers. Each speaker will be given time to address those topics, describe changes in Texas election law, and tell us what voters can expect for the 2022 elections. At the conclusion of the remarks, we will use any remaining time to pose questions submitted in advance by attendees. Our first speaker is Mr. Bruce Sherbet. Mr. Sherbet began duties as Collin County's Elections Administrator in early December 2015. Prior to 2015, he served as Elections Administrator in Dallas County for 24 years and spent another 2 years doing the same work in Ellis County. Having begun in elections work when he was 19, Mr. Sherbet brings decades of experience to the job. Mr. Sherbet, thank you for joining us this afternoon. You have the floor.
Thank you for inviting me today. It's my pleasure to be here with you. I do have the topics you want to discuss, and I'm happy to do so today. Thought I'd start first talking about just where we are, state of elections in terms of the 2022 election processes. We've had somewhat of a brewing perfect storm, if you will, this year. Some of it's just circumstantial mostly. And it's, when I say we, I'm talking everyone in the state. I can speak for other elections administrators on some of these issues I'm about to go over. For one, legislation changing the election processes was a little bit late coming this year because in a normal year, session ends in May, you get everything in place by September, October, November. We didn't even have information coming to us until after the second session of the special session. That said, we had redistricting, massive redistricting statewide. We had to perform, get our voter rolls correct and in place. We also had the new election law legislation, which required changing a number of our forms, a number of processes, training curriculums, pretty significant changes all the way around based on those legislation changes. And with COVID pandemic shortages, supply chain issues, that even exacerbated the problems that we had in being ready for our election processes this year. Now in Collin County, we had two other elements to add to it. We had two special elections in January, not scheduled before they were called. The second largest city, McKinney, we had a January 15 election. We had a January 29 City of Frisco election, end of March runoff election for Frisco. Those added to our real challenges on getting everything up and running. The state was late getting us information, not really their fault. They got things late too in the process, but we've all been trying to catch up and not get ahead of the game like we normally would be, at least a little bit ahead of the game. That's really added some significant challenges. We were mailing out ballots for the primary before we even held Frisco's election. So we have ballots going out for various elections in the process. Dave Lieber of Dallas Morning News wrote a story. It's April 10th. I think it came out in Sunday paper, and it identified Collin County and our circumstances. You know, he's the watchdog for the Morning News, and he called me to talk about a letter he got from a voter saying they got 2 ballots. They don't know why they couldn't combine these elections into one election. It seemed like a waste of money. And I had to explain today, we have 2 elections. So they're talking about the May 7th city and school district election and the May 24th primary runoff elections. And as we talked further, and in his story, we talked about the growth in Collin County. We had 100,000 more registered voters in this March primary than we did in the primary 4 years prior in the last midterm election. The fastest growing county in the state and in the nation, basically. We have challenges just by growth alone and confusion. He also pointed to how many elections we're holding this year. And you can go on our website and I can show you. That shows you just an example. I know you can't read it, but we're holding 9 elections this year. Some of them are overlapping and periods of processes are overlapping. We're mailing ballots for both the primary and the city school district election right now as we speak. It adds to something that I know the league has been very concerned about over the years, confusion, voter fatigue. Hopefully, maybe some point we can look at this schedule of elections and see if there's a more pragmatic way to do this. Now, these 100,000 new voters I'm getting, they're not coming from neighboring counties necessarily. They're coming from other states, California, up north, east, west of us. They're coming here with different laws in mind of how they did elections there versus what they see when they get into a polling place here. So it's incumbent on all of us, the state, us, you, media, and all of us to try to help them not be so confused. This year it's been a little bit harder because we have so many elections, and it's a good problem to have growth, I guess, but it's also a problem if you're causing confusion. Let's talk about the new legislation, primarily Senate Bill 1, but there was some other legislation. Let's talk about the impact of that. For one, I think the biggest challenge we've had is just being able to have our forms in place, get everything that we needed to start voting in January 1. We had supply chain issues. We had the state is required to put a portal together for voters to be able to track their mail ballot, which is in place now, but was very late coming to the counties, and our trainings were very late. Again, not pointing to the state, but circumstantial, causing us all to be very much challenged in that process. We find that a lot of things in Senate Bill 1, just on the first glance at it, you would think, well, maybe it doesn't affect us here in North Texas because it was really addressing things that happened, maybe, for example, in Harris County during the pandemic when they opened up voting locations to be open, for example, 24 hours straight. None of the counties here were doing that. They had drive-through voting. I don't know of any counties doing that. Drop boxes for depositing ballots. We didn't do that here. So those things, we really weren't impacted by Senate Bill 1 in the process. One part of it was a little bit of a significant issue, and that is voters, you can't mail out ballots, ballot applications, unsolicited. The law now restricts counties from doing that. We never did that in Collin County. I don't know of the counties around here. I know Harris County mailed a lot of applications out to potential mail ballot voters over 65 years, for example. So we had that dynamic that the law says now, if a person wants the ballot, they have to individually request their application for the ballot instead of just calling and saying, hey, can you mail me and my husband a ballot application? We would now have to tell them by our new laws, we can mail you one and we'll need your husband to request his application. So it's more restrictive, and there are severe penalties if you violate that from an administration viewpoint in the process. But all in all, those processes in Senate Bill 1 didn't affect counties as much as in this area at all. in fact. The polling place experience, I know you wanted to know about that, impact under Senate Bill 1. The impact for the voters' experience and the poll workers' experience is very similar to what it was before Senate Bill 1 in many, many areas, meaning a voter going into a polling place still has to qualify. They still show their ID, whichever one of those acceptable forms of ID. And if they don't have one, they have the reasonable impediment process. All of that has remained the same. Voting equipment, voting procedures are the same. Changes at the polling place level more dealt with adding some additional definitions of what is allowed and not allowed. Also, affidavits have changed. For example, if you're assisting a voter, the affidavit you complete, the process for assisting is the same as it was before, but the affidavit has additional wording, more strict wording, I guess, if you will, and also requires the person assisting to say if they've been compensated or not for giving that assistance. So that required us to get new affidavits and change the process, but the experience wasn't really changed much in the polling place besides the affidavit. Poll watchers were another area addressed quite a bit in Senate Bill 1, but the poll watcher requirements that were submitted in terms of voter experience or poll watcher experience are very similar to what it was before Senate Bill 1. And I'm talking in-person voting experience now. And that is poll watchers have free movement in a polling place. We've always trained that. Poll watchers can observe the opening and closing processes. They have been allowed to do that here anyway. That's part of the process of our training. They can follow the judge when they bring materials in to the location, the election central. That's still the same. Poll watchers have requirements that they didn't have before. They have to be trained by a program at the state level and get a certificate. If they don't have that certificate, they can't serve as a poll watcher. There's additional wording on their certificate of appointments and the requirements. Poll watchers still can't talk to voters. Poll watchers cannot disrupt or intimidate voters. That's still not allowed, and it wasn't before. Poll watchers can be removed if they disrupt or do something that rises to the level of removal. That's a very rare situation, extremely rare, but if it needs to occur, it can still occur. It could before too. It does require now that the person working in the polling place, a poll worker, observed that circumstance and bring that to the attention of the judge. You can't restrict movement within a polling place of a poll watcher. That has been defined now and pretty much in practice. What you see Senate Bill 1 did, and it was a significant change that you'll see, is Senate Bill 1 changed the mail ballot processes in a pretty significant way. And it changed it in a way that voters are now required to put their ID number on their application and also their returned voted ballot carrier envelope. It's either a driver's license or Texas ID, or it's the last four of their social. And under this law, then the election ballot board will look at their application and their return ballot and make sure that that number that the voter listed matches the number we show in our voter registration database. And from the start, that we knew that was going to be challenging because voters, when they register to vote, don't always put either a driver's or a social. Some will put both, some will put, it used to be required, not even required at all until a decade or so ago to have those numbers in place. So we knew there were going to be rejections going in, and that's exactly what we saw going in to these elections in January and February and March. We've done 4 elections now, so we know what to expect. So let me go over some data to just show you if the voter sends that in, it's not correct, we reach out to the voter. We say, hey, you don't have your ID number, we need it. We don't have it on file to match and verify. So you're going to be rejected initially until we can see further action taken to resolve that rejection process. So let's look at some of the numbers of how those rejections came in. We mailed out about 7,900 ballots for the primary elections. 1,633 ballots were not returned. That's about 20%, just not returned at all by the applicant. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but that's exactly in range of what we expect in elections before Senate Bill 1 or the last 20 years. You get about a 20% non-return rate on ballots you mail out. Not really sure why that is, but that's what happens in the process. So of the 6,200 ballots approximately that were returned to us, we had 781 ballots rejected. They were rejected because of a defect. Now, of those rejections, and that's why it's important I'm telling you these numbers, 755 of those 781 rejections were because the ID was not there, or it didn't match what our database showed it to be. 781 voters, we reached out to them by email, by phone calls. We gave them opportunities to correct that defect. Under Senate Bill 1, the state had to put together a portal called a ballot tracker, and voters could actually go onto the ballot tracker and track from when we received their application, mailed their ballot was returned, and if it was rejected, there is a place there for them to go into to correct that defect. And again, most of these rejections, as you can see, of 781, if 755 were rejected for ID, that's by far the majority of the rejections. The other way, they could come in person and cure it here at our office up to 6 days after the election. If we had enough time before the election, we could mail that ballot back to them, tell them to put the number on there, or we could have them go to a polling place and vote a provisional ballot, and then that would be reviewed and accepted after the election. So of the 755 rejected because of ID, or total rejections, of the 781 total rejections, 331 were Democrat rejections, 450 were Republican rejected ballots. Now that percentage is about a 60-40 if you look at it. Well, it parallels, if you will, with how many ballots we mailed out that were Democrat and how many were Republican mail ballots for the primary. That was about a 60-40 split, 60 being Republican, 40% being Democrat. Rejections were right in line with that same 60-40 type breakdown. Of the other rejections, that small handful, 18 were because the voter forgot to sign or did not sign their carrier envelope with the ballot. 4 were questionable signatures that possibly weren't signed by the same person that applied, that returned their ballot. 3 were missing a document that was required, like a statement of residence. And 1 was a witness issue where it was an incomplete witness process. Those 18, 4, and 3, and 1 would be what we would normally see as rejection of ballots previous to Senate Bill 1. Those 755 were not there previous Senate Bill 1 because they were not required. We did see improvements as we went through the process. Part of this problem is we didn't have enough time statewide, all of us, to really get the word out, to try to really get the message. Be sure and put those numbers down, or you're going to have to be doing some additional actions, or you're going to face maybe a final rejection part of the process. We start highlighting where they needed to put the number. We start putting bright colored instructions saying, attention voter, make sure you put your numbers on here. We ended up with about a 13% rejection rate. You'll see the state saying statewide that is right in line with what state rejection rate is. I'm hoping, other county elections administrators certainly are hoping, that we can keep reducing those percentages and those numbers down. I'm hoping next legislative session, if they look at this issue again, that maybe open more opportunities for different ways for voters to resolve that, instead of just the tracker or coming in person or going to a polling place, maybe some email capability or doing something else to make it a little easier on some of the voters. Not everybody has email. Not everybody has the opportunity to get to a polling place or get to Election Central. So I'm sure that will continue to be a topic of discussion. The other 2 topics you wanted me to talk about today, the state audit. I think everyone probably knows, but the state is auditing the 2 largest slated Republican counties and 2 largest slated Democratic counties. That's Collin and Tarrant, the Republican side, and Dallas and Harris, Democrat side. That audit is in its 2nd phase. I can tell you it is ongoing. We have 480 boxes of documents from the 2020 presidential election available for the state to go through and peruse. We have sent thousands and thousands of documents or turned them over to the state, and they are reviewing. I don't know how long it's going to take, but one thing to keep in mind, if I have 480 boxes in Collin County, Harris County probably has 2,000 boxes. Dallas probably has 1,800 boxes. Tarrant probably has 1,500 boxes. So it's a massive undertaking. And the state has, we've met with them several times. I know they're in the process. They were a little bit slower in getting their division in place even after it was legislated to be in place. So anyway, we don't know the timeline, but I know that it's in process. Final thing, poll worker recruitment. I want to point to something that I purposely waited till the end to include. I could have added at the beginning with our challenges of our perfect storm. Finding people to work in elections is a difficult task. Both parties have been tasked with it. We've been tasked with it. Temps, we bring in years like this, starting January, we bring in 40 temporary employees to help us with the phone banks, to help us with voter registration entry, to help us with mailing out ballot processes, because we're a very small department overall compared to the size of the county. Basically, we got 7. Not because HR, our county HR didn't try. They went to temp agencies. They tried everything they could. It's countywide issue, but it really impacted us. So we had to do some really creative staffing and preparations to get through these 4 elections we've already held. I'm hoping and I'm optimistic it's going to get better, and I'll have my 40 in place for the November election, because we'll double polling places for the gubernatorial election in November versus what we had for the primary election. We're going to appoint new judges and alternate judges in summer months through the Commissioner's Court. Parties give us those recommendations. They come from the political parties. And a lot of those carry over from like precinct chair appointments or elections that take place in these primary elections. We didn't have any staff shortages. We didn't have polling places not open in the primaries. We had that part was really pretty good considering the challenges, I guess, that we have. But overall, it was incredibly challenging. And I can tell you now, with almost 40 years of experience in running elections, I can't think of a year that offered more circumstances of challenge going into a major year. A lot of attention on these elections. There's a lot at stake, both sides, and we understand that. The challenges they are what they are, and we are ready to tackle those. But we certainly have found them to not be easy for any of us in this state this year. So that's what I wanted to offer today. I'll be happy to answer any questions if I have any time left to do so. And again, I want to thank you for asking for me to be here today. And I hope some of the things I've given you information on have been helpful. Be sure and look at our website. Know that our elections are coming up very quickly for this city, school district, and primary runoff, and all the important dates are on those websites.
Thank you, Bruce.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Christina Das. Ms. Das is an attorney in the NAACP Legal Defense Fund's Prepare to Vote and Voting Rights Defender Project, where she oversees election protection efforts in both Texas and South Carolina. Through on-the-ground advocacy, public education campaigns, and litigation in the courtroom, Christina works with her team to create a robust legal and legislative record for expanding voter access and improving elections administration. She is a community organizer of 10 years who got her start in civic activism during the 2012 presidential election. Christina has since continued work on ballot access and campaign strategy across Pennsylvania and New York. Ms. Das, we appreciate you joining our panel. You have the floor.
Thanks so much, President McKenzie. Can you hear me? Yeah, thumbs up, or let me know if you can hear me all right.
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. Great. So thank you for that. And thanks to Bruce for being here as well. I really appreciate the time with our elections administrators. The work that you do is critical, and it's great to see that you're spending time informing the community about report outs from the past election. It's not a given that elections administrators will do that. So I want to thank Bruce for his time. I'm just going to do a brief overview of LDF, and then I'll get into some of our observations from the March 1st primary, as well as respond directly to some of the comments that, that Bruce also gave, and also the report outs that he provided. So LDF, as President McKenzie mentioned, is where I work. It's the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. We are America's most historic civil rights organization, fighting for racial justice and civil rights in every facet of American life. Our goals are to expand democracy, eliminate disparities within the law, within policy, within the halls of the legislature, and really make sure that our society fulfills the promise of equality for all Americans. And so how do we do that? Within LDF, I work at the Thurgood Marshall Institute, where I lead our on-the-ground election protection for Texas and South Carolina. So through our election protection programs, we center all voters. So it's important to know that it's a volunteer-run program. While we are staff and attorneys, organizers, policy advocates, we really rely on everyday Texans to make sure that all voters have equal opportunity and access to participate. So we do a 360-degree approach for elections and election protection. What does that mean? That means we start way ahead of the March 1st primary. We started last year, and we're already working towards November and even in for the subsequent elections. What we do is we create public education materials, making sure that, for example, voters in Texas are aware of the sweeping changes that SB 1 has initiated, and also that they know their rights and they know how to cure ballots if necessary, how to contact local elections administrators. And then we also have a program of training poll monitors to go out on election day, which I'll also talk about. These poll monitors are nonpartisan. We help anybody vote, irrespective of political party. Our goal is to make sure that all voters who are eligible can access the ballot. And so we create a coalition through national, state, and local partners. LDF is a part of a larger coalition. We work with the Lawyers Committee, the Texas Civil Rights Project, the League of Women Voters is a key partner of ours, and NAACP chapters, as well as so many others. And our goal is to be active 360 days around the year, because elections, as Bruce told you, aren't just in November or the primary, right? So there's elections coming up in May, there's special elections, there's runoffs, and our goal is to create a record of, through direct advocacy, of what poll monitors are experiencing, what voters are experiencing, and poll monitors are observing, so that we can then bring this information and use it for our legal work, whether that be in the courtroom or through our policy advocacy in the halls of the Texas legislature. So even though it's not a legislative session year in Texas, LDF is on the ground, and we are preparing all of our records to make sure that we come prepared in 2023 to meet with your representatives and advocate for you as the voters. So that's a brief overview of election protection. I hope to share a link with you all to sign up for future trainings and speak to this chapter directly about a training for election protection and how you can get out there and make sure that you are our eyes and ears for democracy. You'll be the ones that are checking to make sure that polling places are complying with the ADA, complying with the Texas election code, and making sure that they're opening on time, staying open as necessary. So there's a robust training that we provide for that, and we will be active for the May election, both for May 7th for the school board elections and constitutional amendments, as well as May 24th for the runoffs. So I'm going to add a link in the chat after I'm done for you all to sign up, and then you'll get a separate 1-hour training if you're interested. So some of the things that you all wanted to hear from me about today were the differences between poll monitors, poll workers, and poll watchers. So there's a wide variety of differences. Sometimes the language is really confusing. So poll workers are those that you heard about from Bruce. Those are our civil servants that taking time out of sometimes their paid jobs, or they work with the elections administration and they are staffing the polls. For the primary, that means that the political parties staffed up the polls, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. They had their poll workers, they had polling machines that they got. So that's how the primary operated. But these are paid workers that help our elections function. That's the basic concept that you should take away from this. And how is that different from poll watchers? Poll watchers are partisan poll people that are either representing a campaign or a candidate's committee or a cause. Maybe they're for Prop 1 or Prop 2 that you'll see on the upcoming ballot for May 7th. And they are crucially different from poll workers and poll monitors because they do tend to be partisan. At times they can be paid by that private individual or candidate or candidates committee that's sending them out there to basically make the case for their campaign. And those are the individuals, that have expanded powers under SB 1, as Bruce told you. So I do want to highlight that this is a aspect of concern for LDF, because more powers and less accountability for partisan poll watchers is not a good thing. Watchers, while they have to complete online training programs developed by the Secretary of State, they are free to still roam freely around polling locations. This can create an issue of coercion or intimidation for voters. Just imagine that you're filling out your ballot at your ballot booth. Every individual wants privacy, and it's their right to vote without coercion. So it can be concerning, and we've seen reports that it's concerning and also intimidating to voters to have poll watchers roam freely around polling locations and polling booths. And again, elections officials are actually subject to Class A misdemeanors for knowingly obstructing a poll watcher's view. So the tenor that we're setting in this conversation is concerning because we subject our election officials to a Class A misdemeanor for getting in the way of a poll watcher who could then be intimidating a voter, right? So it's always in the best, it's always in the best light to give more powers to our elections administrators and our poll workers, not watchers, so that poll workers are able to do their job efficiently, make sure that there's no lines, and make sure that voters are voting with the utmost confidence and voting free from intimidation. There's also the concern that, poll watchers, while yes, they can be removed if they're doing something that's against the law, they're still bound by civil and criminal laws. They can't throw a water bottle at you or, throw things at you. That's assault, right? So they will be removed for that case. Poll watchers still can be misinterpreting the law. SB 1 is very confusing. It's over hundreds of pages of legislation that have then been distilled into a law. And so we risk the situation, which has happened, of poll watchers misinterpreting the law, misinterpreting what duties assisters have for voters, and then reporting assisters to voters and causing issues in terms of civil penalties for assisters, where assisters are still within their right to assist voters. So in general, it's a very convoluted situation that I'm trying to explain simply, but all you need to know is that it's concerning for LDF that poll watchers have expanded powers and they can't be removed unless a poll worker or a judge observes the behavior directly. And then also the poll worker or judge could be subject to a fine if they are getting in the way of the poll watcher. So partisan versus nonpartisan, keep that in mind as well. As we talk about nonpartisan poll monitors, that's what you should think about whenever you think about the NAACP, whenever you think about the Lawyers Committee, whenever you think about election protection. You should think nonpartisan. They are here to help me vote. It doesn't matter who you're voting for. We don't ask that. That's not part of our job. So we would recruit and train nonpartisan election protection monitors to go out and monitor problematic poll sites or just their neighboring poll site in their community. We had monitors go out in Collin County that monitored their typical polling place and let us know everything went smoothly. I had a 5-minute wait and I'm in and out. I had a great time. Thanks, Christina. Or we had monitors that let us know in Collin County for the March 1st election, at the end of the day, there were long lines at certain polling places. And so what happens when there's a long line? The polling place has to stay open later to accommodate all of the voters that are in line. In Collin County, this was not an issue, and the polling places were open, if necessary, a little bit later to accommodate the longer lines for the after work rush. And I think I saw that happening around 6 o'clock, and several media outlets reported on that as well. I was in Waco in McLennan County for election day, where we did not have long lines, but it makes sense, right? You just heard Bruce talk about the exponential growth of voters that the county is experiencing. And so we saw some incidents of longer lines. Elections election monitors are also going to be, in terms of our eyes and ears on the ground, they're the ones that will call in and let us know if a polling place has an accessibility issue, if there's lack of signage, if there is a ramp that's faulty. These are all situations that we saw, for example, in Harris County in 2021, and that we're also seeing, we saw in Tarrant County, we saw in all over Texas, honestly. So these are issues that occur in every single election. There's accessibility issues, there's issues with curbside voting. And so our monitors are the ones that, despite not having any legal experience, they can identify these issues, let us know. And then we have a team of attorneys that then escalate these issues to the elections administrator or to the Secretary of State's office. And we also create a record, as I mentioned, so that we will send poll site advocacy letters after election day. And if need be, we use this as direct evidence for our lawsuits. And we do have ongoing litigation for SB1, so I'm limited in some of what I can say for that. But all the testimonials that we collect from our poll monitors are crucial for our litigation efforts. So that is an overview of poll watchers versus workers versus monitors. I also just want to talk quickly about, some of the changes that we saw from SB1 and, responding to some of the comments that that Bruce had informed us about. Some of the things that we saw from LDF's side for SB1 is that while the Secretary of State's office and the state created an opportunity for a process to cure, it was woefully inadequate. So the ballot tracker set up by the Secretary of State's office pursuant to SB1 was unusable for numerous voters, hundreds of voters. We constantly got complaints about it. So hundreds, if not thousands of voters, to be honest, because it required the same ID information that was missing from an individual's voting record to access the ballot tracker. For mail and in-person curing, both procedures are essentially discretionary for counties to implement. So I'm happy to hear about Collin County being on top of it. And, that's all that I've heard is that, you have been responding to voters, letting them know of their opportunity to cure. Using email and phone is great. A lot of counties did not do that. And again, that's the problem when you have desegregated or a non-uniform method of notifying voters how to cure. You will see 254 different implementations of SB1 across 254 counties in Texas. And that is very concerning to us as voting rights advocates because we want all voters to have the same process. It helps eliminate confusion, and it also creates a system in which we can analyze the results more equally and make sure that we see what's most effective. So I'm also going to comment quickly on for this election, we also saw that there were a lot of issues in terms of even both the vote by mail curing as well as even the 6-day curing process after. So Texas State Independence Day happened right after Election Day, which cut off a day for voters to cure. That was something that should have been assessed early on, and we should have gotten another day for voters to be able to cure and come and have that 6-day window. They actually got a 5-day window, and it wasn't until after the fact that elections administrators were realizing this. And again, that comes down to decentralized voting across 254 counties. We're also seeing that the 2022 primary election was a very low turnout election across Texas. Texans haven't really fully experienced the full impact of SB1. They need to brace themselves unless Congress takes action. It's crucial, given the surge in turnout in some of these counties like Collin, that we have, the ability to have widespread analyzing of vote by mail, expanded vote by mail processes that Texans and elections administrators get processes implemented way in advance of election day of being able to cure these ballots, right? So I'm hearing from elections administrators across the state that they didn't get enough notice or that they didn't have enough process implemented to properly educate voters. And this is not just in Collin County, right? I work in 40 other counties. So why was SB1 implemented without proper time to properly educate our elections administrators, staff up, and educate our voters? While there weren't staffing shortages in Collin, you saw staffing shortages across the state with polling places opening late. So this really does come down to the state and the Secretary of State's office being woefully unprepared to implement SB1. I'm going to stop there in terms of SB1 and our poll watcher, poll worker, poll monitor program. I'm happy to take other questions, but I will say that, yeah, across 187 of Texas's 254 counties, 22,898 duly cast mail-in ballots, about 13% were rejected, and that's not by coincidence. So it's extremely concerning, and I'm excited to talk to you all about it and make sure we have legislative workarounds for it.
Great. Thank you, Christina. We will now move into the Q&A. And attendees of today's event had the opportunity to submit questions when they registered and also throughout this event. And we will address as many questions as we possibly can with our remaining time. So let's move to our first question. Does the Collin County Elections Department have a sufficient number of full-time, non-temporary employees to support the growing population and implementation of the new election requirements? Bruce, will direct that one to you.
Well, it's a good question, and it's one that's been on my mind. We're growing so exponentially. We have 15 employees. And I would say if you compared us to other counties of like size, we're definitely going to be on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of numbers of full-time employees. We have been able to be very successful in supplementing some of our needs because of the lower number of full-time staff, using temporary staff in our phone banks and in our mail ballot processings and our technicians for field support. So that's been pretty good, but I think it's a question that I would answer with, there's no doubt in my mind, we need to start increasing at some point the full-time staff. I think we'll get a better sense of it after the end of this year, after the November election. If we need to, I wouldn't hesitate to present the request to commissioners. I got a new full-time position last budget year. That was very helpful to me. It was in a very important area I needed to have extra coverage in. So the answer is yes. If we keep growing like this, there's no question. When I was in Dallas, I had quite a few more, but it's a larger county. This county is going to be equal to size if it keeps growing like that within a pretty short order. And so yes, I think I want to do more assessing to see exactly which areas those needs are. I don't think we're in harm's way at this point, but the growth continuing like this, no question.
Okay, great. And Bruce, I know you had mentioned the audit. One of our attendees had a question in regards to how much is the cost of the audit and who is responsible for those expenses?
The state's 100% responsible for the cost. We're not incurring any costs from the state audit. I know that the legislature appropriated, I think it was the legislature, $4 million for the division of forensic audits at the Secretary of State's office. I don't know how many employees that is, but we're not going to incur costs. The state will definitely incur costs because it's a substantial undertaking.
Okay, great. Thank you. Christina, a question for you. What can individuals do to help make sure voting in Collin County is safe and accessible?
Thanks for that. I love this question. There's a lot that you can do, right? So it depends on your bandwidth, but I always say that the best thing you can do as an individual, we all have a friend, a neighbor, a family member that you can take to go vote, give them a ride, and take them on May 7th, take them on May 24th. A lot of your neighbors probably don't know that you have 2 upcoming elections just in May. Off-cycle elections are crucial, and especially when it comes to Texas, you're always amending your state constitution. So you will have a lot of those. If you have more bandwidth and you're in this space, you probably are a leader in your community or your church or your mosque, and you have a bully pulpit. So I would like to see you sign up for the link that I'm going to put in the chat for a poll monitor training, where we're going to train you to be a democracy defender. You're going to go out and either on bike or car, monitor the polls, let us know how everything's going, and you can, help our election protection effort that way. You can also sign up to be a poll worker, right? I'm sure that the elections administration would love that. We always need more poll workers, and there was a massive shortage across Texas. So if not in Collin, then you can tell your neighbors or family members in other counties to sign up to be a poll worker, or a alternative election judge or an election judge as well. So there's so many ways to make sure that you're protecting your elections, getting involved. And I would say that's what I would recommend this year. Next year, it's going to be a different story. We're going to need you all to come with us to the State House and to the legislature and make sure that we are expanding voter protections for Texans, and namely passing online voter registration, it's just abysmal that Texas doesn't have that.
Thank you so much for that answer. Our next question. Figures released by the Texas Secretary of State revealed that more than 24,000 Texans who tried to vote by mail had their ballots rejected in the March primary. This is roughly 12.4% of mail-in ballots statewide. And this is going to be for both of you. Bruce, can you address the numbers as they relate to Collin County?
Well, it would go back to the numbers I gave in my presentation in terms of the rejection rate. We're in line with that 13%, 12% range. I can tell you all the county administrators I know are working diligently to try to reduce those numbers down. And the only way we can do that is using every source available to us to educate voters on this new process, to make sure our websites are clear and concise in their messaging, to depend on media for help, and to want the state to do their due diligence in helping on, and organizations, especially such as you, to just make sure voters know what is expected if they're voting. It's a new process. Any processes that are new are going to come with challenges. This one, there wasn't really as much time as I would have preferred to have it in place to have maybe circumvented some of the problems we already have experienced with that. But that's behind us, and now we're moving forward.
Great, thank you. Christina, given that local election officials are limited in how they can interact with prospective mail-in voters, what can be done to educate voters so that their ballot counts?
Sure. And I'm just going to quickly respond to the earlier question that you had, because you said it was for both of us. So I'll just ground us in numbers. As I said that, and as Bruce has said, as many of us have said, it's about 13% across the state. That's totally accurate during this primary, right? But let's talk about past primaries. That's about 1% to 2% in past primaries we've seen in rejections in terms of vote by mail ballots. And grounding us again in numbers, during the 2020 presidential election, Biden beat Trump by a smaller margin than that, and Trump beat Clinton in 2 states by smaller margins. Approximately 1 million people voted by mail in 2020. And if we were going on 13% rejections, that's 130,000 rejected mail-in ballots at this rate. And so the primary was not democratic. The primary was not accessible. And so it's important to root us in numbers and also margins, that even though we're seeing this across the state, it's completely unacceptable. And that's nearly 23,000 eligible Texans who could not vote. So I just want to make sure that we're focusing on that. It's extremely, we can't just talk around it. To your next question, yeah, so through SB 1, elections administrators cannot freely disseminate vote by mail ballots. They are subject to new penalties, right? So we have to, again, protect our elections administrators and our election workers, but they shouldn't be subject to these kinds of penalties for freely distributing vote by mail ballots or encouraging voting. What we can do, however, is advocate for an expanded window for accessing vote by mail ballots, longer periods for curing. These are legislative workarounds that we should be advocating for, and also making sure that we have sessions like this, segments in which I think that it's great if an elections administrator comes around and comes to various civic groups like this and really goes through the ballot, We need to like go through the vote by mail application and the ballot like we're in elementary school, because it's really difficult. It's really difficult to navigate if you have visual impairments, if you're not a native English language speaker. There's a lot of things to work through. And we need to make sure there's more public education, because also people aren't seeing where the ID number field is also because it's located under the flap of the envelope. I could tell you my grandmother probably would miss it. So I think more public education and then advocating for longer windows for vote by mail ballots to be received, cured, and also for applications as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we do have a couple of questions in regards to poll watchers. Were there more than usual as far as on poll watchers this election? And did you have one at every polling place? That was one of the questions that came in.
So I want to clarify, is that for a poll watcher or a poll monitor?
The question says on poll watchers.
Okay, so we did not have any poll watchers because they are partisan and they are through campaigns and campaign committees. We had poll monitors, and we had about 6 poll monitors go out in Collin County. Through the help of the League of Women Voters and NAACP and other folks, I want to see that number quadruple. We had monitors go out in about almost 100 counties across Texas through our partners. In terms of poll watchers, yes, we saw expanded poll watchers across all counties in Texas through campaigns and campaign committees. Several were reported for intimidating voters, and several themselves were facing, then we had situations of like infighting between various campaigns in which poll watchers would get into conflicts, which can be distracting when you're going to go vote so we don't want any situation that is creating any type of drama or any type of conflict at the polling place. But we did see that with poll watchers across the state.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another question. In the recent primary election, we dealt with at least one voter that had been purged from the rolls due to a clerical error by a voter registration clerk in another county. While it is desirable to timely cancel registrations in one county when a voter moves to another county, what checks and balances can be introduced to ensure erroneous cancellations do not occur? Bruce, we'll start with you on that one.
Well, it's a large process, and we have 670,000 registered voters in this county. And we get updates and changes and corrections and deletions daily and frequently in this county, especially with our growth patterns. So there are situations that do occur where there could be data entry errors. There could be a situation of postal service error. There could be all kinds of circumstances that may cause a person to fall through the cracks, if you will. Those are taken very serious by us, and I'm sure other counties, to keep as accurate rolls as possible. I can tell you, because I've been doing this for decades now, that the process is way better than it used to be, in the sense that we're so automated now. And when a person moves, previously 25 years ago, they had to tell us if they were registered in another county when they registered here. Now they don't have to say a word, because we know you're registered in this county, you moved here and registered. It's almost an immediate deletion from that other county. You're no longer registered to vote there. But the process is one that I cannot tell you is perfect. I think there is human error involved in some of these things, and we have to take those on a case-by-case basis. We have to follow the guidelines and the legal requirements required under state law. There's a very definite set of circumstances that we have to follow if it's a duplicate record, or a deceased, or a possible felon record, or whatever record it might be. We have a process that we have to notify. We have to get additional information. There's a process for voters going in suspense if we don't hear back from them, to protect them from just getting automatically deleted. There's also a process if a voter ever fell through the cracks that they could vote a provisional ballot. And I can tell you an example of a person going to DPS to get their driver's license. They registered to vote there. If we never receive that notice from that DPS location and that person votes a provisional, we can go on DPS to DPS and see if they did indeed register, and that provisional will count. So there are protections, but I'm not here to tell you that it's a perfect process. I will tell you there are circumstances we try to prevent from happening, and that all entails good communication between counties and the state, back and forth. We're an offline county, meaning we update offline, where a number of the smaller counties are online, where they do their updates online. So we send our updates in batches nightly versus doing it automatically like a smaller county can do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Christina, is there one demographic of individuals that is more impacted by SB1 than others?
Sure. I would say that SB1, and not just I would say, I think demographic research, several lawsuits that are ongoing between the LDF, as well as other partners across the state, the ACLU, the Texas Civil Rights Project, have identified that SB1 does disproportionately affect Latino voters, Asian American voters, and Black voters. Why? Because these voters tend to live in larger urban settings where we've seen poll sites opening late and having massive shortages of elections workers due to the criminalization of elections through SB1, right? So it's not just a one-dimensional criminalization of elections. We see increased penalties on our voter registration applications. There's penalties for elections administrators to hand out vote-by-mail ballots. There's penalties for elections administrators for intervening in terms of poll watchers. There's expanded powers of poll watchers. And there's also, while there were previously affidavits that you would fill out, now you're subject to penalty of perjury if you're an assister that's assisting a voter maybe with differing abilities. So there's a lot of chilling effect on voters, and it's disproportionately affecting voters of color who always tend to see longer lines due to the urban settings that they live in, as well as those voters who are new Americans and have not maybe gotten their social security numbers, but they are new Americans that are naturalized citizens, and they aren't able to add that number onto their vote by mail application. They added their driver's license numbers, but oftentimes DPS hasn't updated a driver's license to be, synchronous with your social security number and with your new social security number. So it is impacting individuals from certain racial backgrounds. And I'll say that it is predominantly impacting individuals with differing abilities. So those that are offered protections under the ADA, you have a federal right under Section 207 of the Voting Rights Act to vote with an assister of your choice. And LDF and other organizations are arguing that SB1 is in violation of that provision by limiting how an assister can assist a voter. So this is going to directly fall on the backs of those voters with differing abilities. In addition, if you're a curbside voter getting, if you're an individual taking 7 or more voters to vote curbside, you have to, fill out additional affidavits. This directly impacts voters that live in congregate settings like senior citizens or those who live in healthcare facilities, again, voters with differing abilities. So I will say it impacts those communities in particular.
Thank you. Well, gosh, this is definitely an interesting topic, and both of our panelists have provided just incredible information for voters in Collin County. This does conclude our program. Thank you to our panelists, and also thank you to our attendees. We hope this forum provided you with valuable information on the new voting laws in Texas. We would also like to remind you that city and school board and constitutional amendments elections will be held on Saturday, May 7th, with early voting on Monday, April 25th through Saturday, April 30th, and Monday, May 2nd, and Tuesday, May 3rd. The primary runoff election is on Tuesday, May 24th, with early voting on Monday, May 16th through Friday, May 20th. And of course, you can view voter guides on our website at lwvcollin.org or enter your address at vote411.org to see a personalized sample ballot. Thank you for being an informed voter.